Davidhazy. Technically speaking, I'm an amateur photographer and a professional designer of mostly useful things. And I know it's not much of a stretch to say this, but I believe that the way we view and understand the world around us informs the quality and the impact of our work. And so what I thought I would do is share a few stories about how empathy and human sort of understanding has impacted my work and my life and photography and such. And that's kind of where this title comes from. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, and not far from the campus of RIT. And I currently live in Austin, Texas, and I spend part of the time in Budapest, Hungary as well, and that's where I flew in from a couple of days ago. I also enjoy taking the odd adventure, which you'll see, and not unlike me coming here today to talk to you. So thank you for having me. And I wanted to kind of start by sharing a video with you. It was produced by BBC Media Action a couple of years ago, and it's a video that was part of a campaign in support of the Syrian refugee crises. So let me start there, and then we'll kind of pick up conversation a little bit. Here we go. So whether it's sort of the end product of your work, a piece of video or communication like this, or it's a design tool that's used in the creation of your work, I thought this was a really great example of how we can help each other connect with other people and build empathy for their unique sort of needs and fears and aspirations and stuff. And and to see what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes, quite literally, and see what their journey is. So I like that example. So I've put together some of my work and experiences, and I've organized them into kind of three parts. And I say that more so for my benefit to kind of help me organize things. There's not going to be a test on this later. First being about observation, which is to build a deep understanding for other people through personal experience and immersion. Transformation, which is how we transform human insights into viable solutions that kind of meet their needs. And inspiration, which is how we can give greater meaning to our work and to other people. Actually, let me do a quick show of hands. How many people flew in for the conference? Raise your hand. Okay, quite a bit. And okay, put your hands down. And now, how many people prefer sitting in the aisle seat? Raise your hand. Aisle seats. How many aisle seaters? Okay. All right, a few of you. Okay. And then how many people prefer the window seat? A few more people. Now, I saw some people didn't raise their hand. And you guys are the ones that are usually in the middle seat, the least prepared, saving everything for the last minute and such. So. Anyway, there's plenty of scientific studies about sort of the psychology of where it is we choose to sit on an airplane. And you know, whether that you're kind of introverted or extroverted, you might sit on the window if you like to kind of nest or sleep or, and stuff. And you know, people on the aisle maybe tend to be more extroverted, like to socialize, and have complete control over everything that happens in their row. Well, you know, the designers of airplanes and airplane seats could do a lot better to solve for some of these needs if they put passengers first. But as I'm sure we can all imagine, there's a lot of other factors that become very important in doing that. What I love to sit on the window seat, and some of those other reasons are true, but my main motivation for wanting to sit on the window is because I am completely transfixed by what's happening on the ground beneath us. And I just love flying over places, whether it be cities or sort of barren sort of landscapes, and trying to imagine what it's like to be down there right at that particular moment in time. And if somebody were to design a really great product or experience for me as a flyer, it would be to have an app or a device that would tell me exactly what's happening on the ground as we're flying over it in real time. You know, are there people down there? If there are, what are they doing? What's the temperature? And are these people okay? You know, I love flying over Greenland. It's probably my favorite. You can kind of see how the ice flows like rivers. And it just seems really cold, and I wonder what it's like to be there. This is a photo I took last year flying out of Mongolia. Yeah, does anybody else do that? Does anybody else kind of like staring out the window and imagining those things, or the window of a train as you pass through town, or sitting on a park bench in a city and just watching people? And so I'm going to share a couple little kind of anecdotes with you. These pictures I took when I was 12 years old, high-speed photographs, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this kind of work. But like I said at the beginning, I grew up at RIT, and I was surrounded by my father's sort of photographic invention and sort of all this sort of weird science that was happening. And I wrote an article, a very small article, about high-speed photography that appeared at the end of a Boy's Life magazine. August 1980 issue, I believe. And they're made with a Polaroid camera, a sound synchronizer. You can see the little microphone in the top picture there, and a strobe light. But there's a great deal of sort of anticipation and suspense involved in making pictures like these, because they have to be made in complete darkness too. And this was all rather new to me. And so this was in the basement of our home that I grew up in, and with my racetrack here. And so I would spend a lot of time, before I even took a picture, just trying to make sure everything was set up properly, that the cables were connected, that the car was going where it was supposed to go, that the little needle I had taped to the hood would stay intact, and the balloon would pop and everything would work. And And so all this is kind of going on, but it's not really until that first moment when I turn off the lights and it goes dark that I really kind of understood now my father's world, what he's been doing all this time that I'm not seeing him. This is the work that he's doing. And in that moment, I could kind of really connect with what he was doing, his point of view, and some of his work. And so that was kind of cool. And when I see this picture, this is another thing from kind of my youth. But I love to make scale models of these elaborate sort of rock concert stages of my heroes. Van Halen and Kiss were my sort of childhood idols, and they had these huge, elaborate concert stages with fires and lights and all these things. And I made scale models of these things. And I think I just like doing this because I could better imagine what it was like to stand on that stage staring out into an audience a little bit bigger than this one. And so I went on to, instead of kind of finishing college, I went on to move to Los Angeles to play guitar in some rock bands of my own. And although I didn't achieve any sort of rock stardom, I ended up in Seattle designing sets and building sets for the Seattle Shakespeare Festival and other kind of regional theater groups. And, but one important thing that I learned is that no matter how nice you design sort of a stage, it doesn't mean anything without an audience. It doesn't mean anything without people. And so that was kind of cool. I really love photographs that kind of really draw you in. They beg a question. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this photograph from 2011. I think it was such a famous photograph for probably the same reasons why I love it. That it was a moment in history that was full of suspense and drama, and we can see it on the faces of some of the people in this photograph. And I just, you look at this and you just wonder, what are these folks thinking? President Obama, is he worried? He ordered the strike. Is he worried about what he's seeing on the monitor? Is he confident? Is he amazed? Same with Secretary of State and some of the other folks. So I just love photographs that do that force you to ask a question about what's going on there. And then there's a photograph here of this sort of grizzled man who's at the beginning of a 5-month-long hike through the mountain wilderness. And so again, you might look at a picture like this and wonder, what's going on with this guy? Is he just trying to escape reality? And, is he afraid of what lies ahead? And who is he really? This picture is of me, and it's just 5 years ago. But I had no idea who he was. So anyway, so whether it's from far away or whether it's from up close, thank you, James, that as photographers, we really affect how people interpret the world around us. I love to make photographs, and I grew up around photography, as you kind of know, but it wasn't until 2005 when my father sent me a 60-year-old Leica 3B rangefinder film camera. And once I could kind of figure out how to load the thing, and I saw these rather poor pictures that I took with it, I completely fell in love with the tone that was visible in the film, and I fell in love with sort of this really laborious sort of process involved with just making a photograph. And so like much of you, I just take pictures of stuff that interests me, whether that's hanging out with friends and family. It's my dad's wife, Sue, and my niece, Perry. Whether it's traveling and sort of wandering the streets and seeing what's happening. Whether that's bicycle racing, cyclocross racing in Texas, and then the community of people that surrounds sort of this sport. The unfolding drama, if you will, of sort of the human condition. I love sort of capturing that and in some way or another. People at their best moments, my cousin getting married, and people at their worst moments. And this is me getting caught in a riot that was happening in Washington, D.C. during this last presidential inauguration. You know, immersing myself in things that make me uncomfortable. I do that quite a bit. And in things that make me really proud. And I do that as well, and make pictures. So, but I don't make pictures for the living. But what I do is I observe things for a living. And that's very much a part of my job. I've been working in design for a good 25 years or so. I work closely with teams of designers, whether it be graphic designers or UX designers or architects and writers and researchers and all kinds of other folks. And as a creative director, one of my main responsibilities is for the approach that we take to finding innovative solutions to all kinds of different consumer challenges. You know, whether that be you know, developing a new brand, an identity, or a marketing campaign, or a new product or service, or environment, such as a retail store or a hotel, or a user experience or a mobile application, or all kinds of things. I work across all these different sort of disciplines. But yet I don't consider myself an expert in any particular industry or vertical. But I do have some expertise in sort of the process in which you go through to design things. And so you may have heard the term sort of human-centered design. And all that is sort of a creative methodology for problem solving that is based upon a deep empathy for the people you're designing for and arriving at solutions that meet their needs. It doesn't really matter what it is. I personally apply the same kind of design thinking to anything that I'm doing, and whether it's a brand or a marketing campaign or designing a new product. The process in which I go through is very much the same. And sort of broadly outlined, that involves three things. One is understanding what challenge we're trying to solve for and who we're trying to solve it for. Second is to explore ideas that translate those sort of human insights and challenges into viable solutions and prototypes that we can kind of test and get feedback on, and to implement your design by bringing it to life and to be able to assess how it's working after you've done so. And so there's a lot of different innovative firms. IDEO is maybe one you've heard of. Ziba Design in Portland, Oregon, where I used to be a creative director for a few years. They design products and experiences for some of the biggest and most influential brands in the world. And they design things that we interact with every day, whether it's this projector or the chairs or this hotel that we're in. When I went to Ziba in 2007, after doing this work for quite a while, it was there that I really learned how to codify the work and improve upon and codify the work that I've always been doing to make the outcome of design and the process of designing things much more reliable and repeatable. So you have big companies that invest millions and millions of dollars in developing a new product and bringing that to market. And so if they're going to make those kinds of investments and take those kinds of risks, it's really important that there's an integrity and a rigor to the process in which you go through to figure out what that product should be. And and so that's I spend quite a bit of time with our teams just on that sort of design sort of strategy. But I realized around this time that that learning how to walk in other people's shoes was tremendously valuable to me and my career. And so if that's sort of the methodology, sort of the what, or the goal that we're trying, that I and my teams are trying to do, is to really connect brands and products with their target audience and customers and users. And our goal as communicators is to develop a shared understanding between these two sort of entities for what is important and what is meaningful. so again, there's a kind of a few things that we really kind of want to know. We want to understand from a brand or a product's perspective what's really authentic to them. You know, what is philosophically true about a brand. You know, before you make promises that you can't keep or set expectations that will let people down, it's really important to understand who you are, what you stand for, and such. And then the second, of course, as I've already discussed, is to really understand who the user is, the end consumer. What are their needs? To go further than just sort of functional needs, but look at emotional needs and reminiscent and sensory needs and all these other things that we have. To always ask why, to get at sort of underlying motivations and values that people have. And the context in which sort of your brand and your consumer lives is sort of the landscape that's around us. So that would be trends and the competitive landscape and all these different sort of things that influence the success of the project that you're working on. Maybe a quick aside is I talk quite a bit here about sort of the end consumer, and I'll talk more about that. But often what's overlooked, I know some of you, whether you're in-house or you work independently, we're consultants. We're in the service sort of industry. We're trying to communicate and develop, whether it's pictures or images or illustrations that help communicate some of these things. And so I know that in my experience, working with a lot of different agencies and teams, there tends to be a lot of negative sort of energy surrounding clients. That they tend to be seen as sort of the obstructionists of something great and beautiful and brilliant. And if only the client would get out of the way, those things would be true. But I happen to really love clients for two reasons. One is that they bring challenges and problems to me that I would never impose upon myself. And I find that interesting, and I find that a really great sort of opportunity. But kind of secondly, it's important to kind of reframe your sort of point of view. That understanding your client is just as important as understanding the end customer. And it's also really important to make sure that you and your client have the same understanding of who the end customer is. A lot of times when you get into a back and forth about subjective opinion, especially from clients, they say, well, I don't like this or I don't like that, but you can't quite rationalize sort of the reason why. It's our responsibility as consultants to defend the needs of sort of the end consumer. And so it's really important that you and your client understand who those people are and you think about that the same way. I did want to say, though, because there's this rather lovely little heart in the middle. And it goes back to this kind of connection. And I see my job, and sorry about that. My job and again, our job as communicators is to be that heart. We're looking to develop that shared understanding about what's really meaningful. And that's sort of our goal and our objective. So I'm going to share a few different design projects with you. And the first, I'm going to go back to kind of the beginning of my career. Again, before I kind of knew how I did this kind of work, I figured that if I'm going to do this kind of work and design things and market things and develop advertising and stuff for people that I don't know or for clients, I at first wanted to do things that were interesting and meaningful to me. And sort of intuitively, that's kind of how I kind of began. So I was working as a creative or a graphic designer at a small ad agency in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. And we had developed a new, they were rebranding themselves, so we had a new logo, and the owners of the small firm wanted to do a promotional mailing to develop new leads and stuff. And but who really cares about an agency's new logo? Nobody. And so in trying to come up with sort of a concept or an idea that would allow us to kind of touch people and mail something out, I wanted to do something that would surprise and delight people and would interest them, aside from sort of a logo mark. Make it something that people felt like they wanted to keep and hold on to. And our clients tended to be people in technology, big tech companies, and much higher in IQ than EQ. And so, appealing to people's sort of intellect and sort of the geeks and the nerds and stuff was sort of a good place to kind of start. And so, and that's where sort of the mystic worm sort of came from. You'll notice here that the logo that was designed is an M, a W, and an A. The name of the firm was MWA Creative. And after I kind of designed this mark, I kind of looked at it and I go, well, geez, it kind of looks like an ancient hieroglyph. And it actually resembles the hieroglyph for water. And so what I thought I would do is concoct a story about this mark and its presence throughout history, this rather mysterious and curious presence throughout history. And I placed it in factual history. So there was research involved and kind of concocting this story. There was a card that had this long story and all these different sort of examples of how this mark showed up throughout history. It was discovered in the Rosetta Stone, and people understood its meaning of being a symbol of great sort of power and stuff. And our Freemasons, discovered it and adopted it as an icon of their own. Einstein talked about it in his lectures. People don't know this, but the baseball bat that Babe Ruth used had this in it, and that inspired the movie The Natural with Robert Redford, as you all know. And in fact, I was inspired by some work that my father did, using infrared photography to look through layers of paint in old paintings, to see how an artist sort of changed or modified their work as they went. And so that became the subject of a Leonardo da Vinci painting, where you could clearly see that in an earlier version of this painting, he had scribbled this mark in his work. So the mystic worm, I think that one thing that kind of made this kind of cool was that it activated people's imagination, and it imprinted, without really knowing it, it imprinted our brand upon people's sort of psyche, and they remembered the work and they held on to it. And so, leapfrogging quite a bit forward, I've worked on a lot of different projects and worked with a lot of different kind of audiences and customers and users. But this, working with Boeing on this particular project, was the first time that my work was going to involve 4-star generals and heads of state and other things. So trying to really kind of understand these people was going to be a new challenge for me. And so the project was that Boeing, the Space, Defense, and Security Division of Boeing, headquartered in Washington, D.C., they wanted a place to be able to bring their customers to show off new products and to have meetings and make plans and stuff. And they had a 10,000 square foot space in their headquarters building allocated for this kind of a facility. And my team's job is to design sort of the experience of what this is, from the architecture to the service to the communications to all of the technical interactions and stuff that would happen in this space. It needed to be open, so it was a place that people could self-discover things on their own, but it also needed to be highly confidential and secretive. And some of these meetings were highly confidential. And so you needed to satisfy a lot of different needs within this space. You had people from all different cultures and traditions and languages that were coming to this facility, and some with sensitivities that I had never had to deal with before, whether it be the presence of Israeli sort of military prior to people from a Saudi sort of country. You wanted to make sure that there was no evidence of the previous customer's visit when somebody else came in. You needed to factor in the ability to pray during the afternoon and having a room that was looking in the right direction to do that. People would arrive and have entourages with them. And I'd never really had to design for that before either. So if somebody shows up and now you got 10 other people that aren't really involved in these meetings, but what do you do with these people? So we had to kind of formulate some ideas for how to manage those things. And another sort of interesting challenge about this is that within Boeing itself, you had a variety of executives, the CEO and VPs from a lot of these different divisions that are very serious people and they have very strong opinions. And they were all going to be sharing this facility in one way or another. And so everybody had a kind of strong feeling about it. But none of these people are creative people. And so to just kind of go and ask them, you know, well, what do you want or what do you think, it wasn't going to work. And so one of the things that, that our team did was come up with a way to elicit feedback from people early so that we could kind of factor that into our design process. Coming up with a set of visual sort of cards, a little interactive kind of workbook, if you will, of visuals, of metaphors and attributes that we could then engage some of these different executives. We sit at a table one-on-one, and they would pull out some of the things that really they connected with, whether it was a visual or whether it was a metaphor. You know, metaphors are great for attaching meaning to something that doesn't currently exist. So, you know, does this facility feel like a library? Does it feel like a science center? Does it feel like a cafe? You know, just by saying that immediately conjures all these different kinds of things that really changes the design of what we're creating. And so one thing that we learned is that even serious people really they like to play. And so it's easy to kind of be a little standoffish and feel like you need to keep everything kind of very clinical and methodical and stuff. But this was a really great exercise to go through, and we learned quite a bit. An interesting little factoid and things that we kind of look for is in visiting the F-18 plant in St. Louis. You know, you walk into this plant where they make these airplanes and stuff, very serious kind of stuff and highly technical. But you walk into this facility and it looks like it's not what you expect. It looks like somebody's garage, you know, a workshop. It has tables and benches and shelves and tools, mechanical things. And so that was kind of interesting. But the other thing that was going on is this place was spotless. And there was this one wall that when you walk through this facility, it was a common wall and everybody would see it. And it's the kind of wall that you would hang up plaques or the employee of the week kind of a wall, right? Well, on this wall, they had these little baggies, these little clear plastic bags tacked up in a very formal way, showing what they called FOD, which is foreign object debris. So things that were found on the floor and stuff. It could be a little dust bunny, a little speck of something, or a piece of dirt that was tracked into the facility, and it would end up in this bag and pasted up on this wall. And what this communicated to everybody, much like safety, you know, in a manufacturing environment, is that FOD is vitally important, critically important to the work that goes on there, because it can really jeopardize the integrity of the work that they do. And so that was an interesting little thing that we kind of saw and learned, and it goes back to a brand's values, and we can start to bring that out in sort of the design of what we do. You think about experience in kind of two key dimensions. One is time, something that happens over a period of time, before, during, and after. But it also happens via distance, which is how close you are to something. You know, first moment of truth, second moment of truth, third moment of truth. I think everybody probably understands that kind of idea. And so we try to use these different kind of frameworks to design an experience like that. So what you're looking at here is sort of 3 layers of a pancake, where we're trying to, using design language, visual cues, storytelling, and messaging, you know, and different interactions that a user might have, we're trying to resolve those things. So on the top, you have the inspire sort of layer, or the first moment of truth. So at a distance, what captures people's imagination and draws them in? What's the hook? You know, so how are you really reaching people? You know, Tiffany's, for example, it's that sort of turquoise box. You know, you see that color from across the room, you know what it is, and it's what's going to connect with people. And so we're trying to do that at the top level. And just on a piece of two-dimensional sort of piece of paper, we can start to imagine what this experience is going to be. The next layer down is about explaining what you're all about. And so how do you communicate your offering? What are the different products? How do you organize them? Do you color code them? Is there naming involved, a naming convention? And so we start to think about those things and how we resolve them. How do people understand who you are and what you do? And then lastly, is sort of that third moment of truth. When you're up close and you're actually touching the box and interacting with it, what do I do as a user and as a visitor? How do I get to engage with Boeing and all of their products? So how do I touch them? And various sort of, whether it's a collaborative meeting, whether it's an event series that is held there, different interactive kind of learning and simulations, all these different things, different ideas that we come up with that are part of the experience. I borrowed this slide from another program of mine, but it was a much better illustration of sort of this thinking about it in terms of time. And so we do scenario planning and journey mapping of all the little sort of touch points that a person has throughout this journey that they're on. From before they even arrive at this Boeing facility, how are we scheduling the events, and how do they learn about them and stuff, to the moment you arrive and you cross the threshold of the front sort of door. And so, this sort of comic strip narrative kind of format is really effective for making sure that the experience that you're designing and conceiving of is coherent, and it's consistent, and it's meaningful for people. So this is just a storytelling, the hero's journey, sort of storytelling framework that shows up. You use this kind of framework in Star Wars and The Godfather and all these other things. And so we use it in design. And so you see some of the end sort of work. One of the things that, the architecture of this space was initially sort of inspired by sort of a tunnel, a portal from one reality to another. And so we tried to bring that kind of metaphor into the space. But as you work with a project of this size with other architects and developers and stuff, things start to get cost engineered, and they change and they morph a little bit. So it's really important that early on you have a really strong concept. You have something that kind of holds everything together and allows it to evolve a bit over time. But this is kind of what it looked like. We had different zones for people to be able to discover things, for people to be able to have closed-door secret meetings in a skiff kind of room, a highly secretive kind of room. A place to escape, re-nourish themselves, have some food, pray, whatever they need to do. The next is a project they did for Li-Ning in China. And Li-Ning is a large sporting goods and apparel brand. They had 7,000 stores across China. So this is a big company. But you have Nike and Adidas that are coming into China and competing in their backyard. But Li-Ning is an Olympic gold medal winning gymnast, and he founded this company. And he and the Li-Ning sort of brand are held in very high esteem in China. But they needed to be able to better compete in a global marketplace. And so they had some challenges there. This is a little bit about kind of what they kind of looked like and some of their products. And the way they advertised and the shopping experience wasn't always so good. It wasn't at sort of a world-class kind of standard. And so one of the things that we did at Ziba is that our team, our design research team, spent months going back and forth to China and spending time with the sun. We call it the sunshine generation, or the single child sort of generation, the Chinese youth sort of generation. We spent quite a bit of time with them, and these are some pictures from some of the stuff that we did. And, we lived their life. We commute, we listen to their music, we go to concerts, we eat, we play sports, we do other things together. So, living the life, going to shopping malls and other things, and doing intercepts with strangers, in the middle of their shopping experience, or intercepts on the street, going to a basketball court or other things, and trying to engage people and interview them. Interviewing experts, whether people involved in the community or sports or athletics. And so we would take a lot of what we learned, all of this sort of raw sort of data and stuff, and we'd start to formulate a profile. They would kind of combine to be an aspirational profile that represented a target sort of customer. And so there was a few different profiles that were used in sort of the development of Li-Ning's work in retail, and they reflected how people shopped and thought about the role of sport in their life. And although people kind of shop differently and stuff, we designed a store and merchandising and stuff that allowed different people to engage in slightly different ways. For some people, sport was how they expressed themselves. For other people, sport was how they connected with their friends and socialized. And for other people, it was really a big part of how they achieved their goals. But universally, for the folks that we were designing for, sport was not a very formal activity. It wasn't something that they made appointments to do. They just played. They played in their street clothes. They played to kind of socialize. And it was not about winning. It was not, first and foremost, about performance. It was about sort of their life and how they connected with their friends. And so that really sort of inspired some of the design work that kind of came out of that. You'll see some of the graphics and the packaging that was developed, trying to find a balance with this modern sort of Chinese sort of aesthetic that was a little bit of the old and the new mixed together. China is a massive country with a lot of people, and so it was important that we did something that had some massive sort of quality and really bold and dynamic. And then you see some pictures from the stores themselves. And again, we had different zones and different ways that people could engage. We had 3 different store types that varied in terms of how much sales volume they would do, so how much merchandise did a store carry, versus how much engagement did people have with the brand, and different things that the brand was in. Some of the stores had events like ping pong little tournaments, and so the space was adaptive. Merchandising shelves could pull out and become bleachers to kind of sit on and stuff. So people could play, they could shop, they could connect with their friends. So we had some graphics on the wall that you can see here that really told the story of Li Ning and told the story of Chinese sports and athletics and stuff. We had places for gaming that people could kind of challenge themselves and reaction time and have some fun with their friends. Next is a branding project that I did for an Ottawa CFL football team, professional football team in Ottawa, Canada. And they used to have a football team called the Ottawa Roughriders for more than 100 years. And it was a really big part of the community. We probably can all kind of relate that the local sports team becomes a really big part of the fabric of a community. And a lot of people's emotions and their hopes and their dreams and their ups and downs in life are attached to that team. And so Ottawa had that for quite a long time. But that team folded around 2006, if I remember correctly. But they were now getting a new team for the start of the 2014 season. And so this new team was going to need a new name because the old name had been taken by Saskatchewan. So that was the assignment. We needed a new name, a new identity, and brand for this new football team. Naming and logos are a real challenge because they tend to be very abstract. And trying to do them by consensus is near impossible. And so you have a project like this that has a lot of public sort of interest, a lot of public scrutiny. We can probably, some of us might remember that, when different sports teams roll out big new logos, that a lot of times these are PR disasters because of the process they went through or how they engaged the public or didn't engage the public. It can be a bit of a fiasco. So naming and logos are really, really difficult. And especially the added pressure of sort of the public sort of thing. And so one of the things that was really important to do is to engage the public, the alumni of the team, the media, the press, fans of the previous team and fans of the new team, engage them in the process and so that they trusted the integrity of what was happening, even if they didn't have a say in what the final result is. And even if they hated the name that was chosen, they at least understood the process that was going through, and they could kind of understand that and get behind it. And so I organized, and my team, we put together focus groups with the fans, with media, with player alumni. We did a variety of things, from doing collaging, where people could kind of bring to life what they thought Ottawa and Ottawa sports was all about and what they thought this team should be all about. We broke people up into teams, and we had them discuss and consider different needs of a name, whether it be bilingual, to be French and English, to be appropriate for a football team, and had to be unique and kind of ownable and stuff like that. So we had worksheets for people. People could kind of debate and deliberate all these different choices. And so they really got invested in sort of in the process and trying to understand how hard this process could be. As it turns out, that the one thing that makes Ottawa sports special was actually two things. And that's red, which is sort of the national color of Canada, and black, which was the complementary color that was part of Ottawa sports for 100 years or more. And so these colors were very much a part of the fabric of all Ottawa sports, in collegiate to professional and stuff. And so that in itself was a bit of a no-brainer. But to name your team Red Blacks was unique, you know. But it had strength to it. It had character to it. It was unique out of the gate. And so all of those things are really good. And it already carries some meaning with it. The logo mark and the symbol was derived from a saw blade and the lumber industry that is part of Ottawa. Anyway, this was a very successful program, and the team went on just in their second year to be the champions of the CFL in Canada. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We could come back at the end to kind of talk about some of this, but I wanted to talk about a program that I did where we were trying to look 15, 20 years ahead for better cleaning experiences than toilet paper. And what I'll say about this kind of project here is that, one is it's one of my favorite programs. Not so much because of the concepts of the design or the end result, but really the process of being able to meet people and engage in discussions that are usually very uncomfortable, you know. And so what was fascinating about this project is you had a subject that was common to all of us. You know, everybody poops. But there's a taboo. It's very difficult to kind of talk about that. And so how do you get at not just what people's needs are, but you know, what are the different sort of issues, the different behaviors, the different little hang-ups that everybody has? We all have them. And so to be able to kind of talk about those things and find new insights that really could help us design for was a really fascinating process. This is a little bit about what that upfront sort of research process looked like. We had in-depth interviews and went into people's homes, about 20 different people. We developed a really deep understanding for who they were. We would develop some insights for them. We would develop these data sheets for all of these real people where we collect all this data, and we started to really understand the makeup of these folks, the issues that they were dealing with, how they viewed clean. You know, what does clean mean to people? This was a core question. And so it was a fascinating process to go through and learn about. And then hopefully we end up with two kind of aspirational profiles that represented folks. And this is, by the way, one of the reasons when I talked about that video at the beginning of the Syrian refugee, the phone, a lot of times we need a great tool for other designers and a big team of folks to immediately connect with who your target customer is. And so if we can come up with new ways to allow people to really connect and understand them, designers and writers and all these other folks, the better. And so usually that just takes the form of a profile that's made up of a variety of different things. Here's a little bit about that process again. You know, we'd go into people's homes and we'd look at their bathrooms and all the different tools, from the showers to the, you know, what do their kind of routines look like. And we'd sit down and we'd talk to them and have in-depth interviews. They had homework assignments where they would do some journaling over the course of a week, where they would talk about you know, the different things they went through and how they felt when they did them and before and after they did them. They made collages as well, representing what clean meant to them in their lives. Here's a look at some of those profiles that were developed, capturing needs and behaviors and desired experiences, their priorities when it comes to feeling clean. And we would develop an activity model where it kind of goes through the journey. And we had two different sort of models for two different profiles that we developed. From how does people learn about the tools. They learn about what you intake in terms of food and how that affects people's digestive system, to how did you learn about toilet paper and other kinds of things that are involved in sort of our cleaning routines. How does that happen through family and other things? Having the urge to going into an environment and creating an environment that's comfortable for you. So there's sort of nesting and preparation that's involved at home and on the go, especially when you're in a strange sort of environment. The cleaning process, disposing, and people have highly charged emotions at every sort of step along the way. And so we really try to understand those things and look for concepts that really helped kind of solve for them. We spent a lot of time with the scientists. I'm not getting too much into who the client was to kind of protect some confidentiality, but we did spend time with their scientists and technology to kind of anticipate what kinds of things were possible. And some of the concepts that we considered went everything from sort of a magic wand to a variety of other kinds of implements. Again, pulling from another program, we develop hundreds of concepts like this. Big ideas, small ideas. We'd look for patterns and families of concepts that could come together and then we test them. We would get feedback on them. And it's difficult when you don't have a product to show somebody, especially a futuristic project. How do you get consumer feedback about that? And this was one way we did that for a related but separate program where we didn't have a product to show people, but we had some storyboards, and we pulled objects that you could buy, whether it's packaging or different sort of kitchen implements or whatever, that were analogous to something that was part of sort of the concept that we had in mind. And we would create these environments in a room. This is me conducting a session with a participant here where she's interacting with some of the stuff that we pulled together and giving some feedback about some of those concepts. Yeah, and so the last project I had was for a Swiss company called SpotMe. And they develop a mobile app, and they work in the meetings and event industry, and they really help people. This is a small conference, but people are sometimes hesitant to really engage with sessions. When you have hundreds and if not thousands of people, how do you ask questions and really get involved with some of these big conferences that people go to? How do you connect and network with your peers and share information and stuff like that? So for a long time, they had developed products to do this, and I was tasked with trying to come up with a product launch campaign for them that included a trade show booth, and they had made some commitments already. So I had a 6-week window. So in 6-week time, I had to go from nothing to a product launch in Frankfurt, Germany at IMEX, which is a big trade show. And so I looked for inspiration for, I did a lot of other things first to kind of figure out what their story is and what makes them special. But at its core, it was about bringing people together and allowing people to have a shared experience and to collaborate and participate in an experience together. So I look around for inspiration for other things that already exist, whether it be sort of these community-type walls, people that can kind of engage in a public way in sharing their ideas about the future. This was a chalkboard wall in Manhattan, a music video where a lot of different people and their webcams were coordinated in such a way that all of these different people contributed to the making of one video. And it was a really kind of cool and powerful thing. And so all of this led to me developing a trade show booth in a very modest sort of setting. We only had a 10 square foot kind of booth. It was sort of small. And so you had to do a lot of different things. How do you get people's attention in a big trade show environment where you have countries and other things with a huge, elaborate sort of trade show booth? Well, they also rent hardware. They rent iPads at these big conferences. So the hardware was also an important part of their offering, as is the app itself. Technology companies especially, they have a tendency to talk a lot about their product, the performance, the functions, what the app can do, and all these other things. But I thought that in order to have people really invested in SpotMe and what we stood for, I needed to find a different way to engage people other than a product demo. And so I came up with this idea for a community wall that would allow people to come into the space and contribute to it and be a part of this experience. And it was made up of 237 iPads, all of which were connected together and working together, designed furniture and a booth where everything sort of had its place. This is a Swiss company, so it was really important that everything was kind of done just so. This really activated a space. And so without having to do much work, other than to create this platform that other people could come into and make their own, it generated a lot of activity. And that in itself now became your Inspire piece. That's what drew people in and wanted them to come in and investigate further. Even had our own custom Apple boxes, Ken. So I wanted to make sure that the first read here was that this is an events company, you know, and everything that made up this trade show booth communicated what they offer. You know, the charge cases and storage cases, they actually sort of were integrated into the furniture. We had product demos in an environment that was really casual and comfortable, and made people want to just sit down and pick up a conversation. So it was all very deliberate in that way. People engaged with the wall. They connected with other people. They got creative and did sort of fun things. We had surprise, you know, really good surprises and suspense sort of built in. We had events where we would have a giveaway. But I also embedded some Easter eggs in the wall itself. So at random times, somebody might go up and touch one of those iPads, and the screen would flip over, and it would say, "Congratulations, you just won this iPad." And then using theater, the theater of winning sort of an iPad, I thought it was important that they actually win that iPad, not some other one that we bring from the back. And so the salesperson would come over, and we'd actually remove the iPad, and we'd give them the box for it. And people were really excited about this. And so they would take pictures and share it on Instagram and all this other stuff. So again, just by creating a platform and allowing other people to engage with it, really kind of created a really exciting kind of experience, and one that was really viral and took off. So all I wanted to kind of say about that kind of idea and some of the other work is that it's really important to look at, and my team spend a lot of time thinking about how it is we get beyond just meeting satisfying people with what we do, whether it's a communications piece or an ad or a product and stuff, to get beyond sort of, we satisfy their basic needs, we simplify their lives in some way, but we also need to look for ways to surprise and delight people and bring some drama and suspense to in an unexpected way, in a really meaningful way. Now, my work has afforded a lot of really interesting travel. You know, Leaning was in China, so I was spending a lot of time there. The SpotMe thing was, you know, a couple of months in Lausanne, Switzerland. And, but one of the things I like to do between jobs or assignments or on vacations is take road trips. And road trips are great for a couple of things. One is sort of gestation time. Times to kind of think of big sort of wild ideas as you're driving along in a zone and stuff. And untethered to sort of the typical day-to-day sort of things. And by the way, a lot of that research, you know, anybody here like to procrastinate? How many procrastinators in the room? I'm a big procrastinator as well.
I'll tell you tomorrow.
Yeah. So one of the things that I came to realize, you know, over the years of doing some of this design work is, you know, one is I procrastinate. So deadlines are my friend. Without a deadline, nothing gets done. But I realized that the sooner I did some of this upfront research, the sooner I understood what the challenges I'm trying to solve, and the sooner I understood who I was trying to solve it for, was really helpful. Because then I could kind of let my subconscious, you know, work on the solution while I was busy doing other things. And just like this presentation today. But I thought about this for a long time in terms of what it is I thought I would talk about and stuff. But it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I sat down and actually wrote it. And it came out very quickly. But the same thing happens with my design work all the time. The second thing that road trips are really great for is transitions. So whether that's just from getting from point A to point B, or whether it's kind of leaving a problem behind, you know, in search of, you know, a more personal kind of solution to something. And one of the things that I had become aware about with myself over time is that I was having some challenges, and I was asking some tough questions of myself. I had recognized that I was having difficulty maintaining really deep, kind of long-lasting relationships with people, with my friends and otherwise. And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but what I came to realize is that that some of these challenges I was having were actually related to something that I was actually quite good at, and that was understanding the needs of other people and spending a lot of time focused on those things and channeling other people's needs. I wasn't doing a very good job of developing a strong sense of who I was. And so that creates some imbalances in relationships. I was a great listener, but not a very good communicator. I could give, but I couldn't receive very well. And so this kind of cropped up time to time. And so I would often think about this kind of stuff, and road trips were really helpful for trying to kind of get a handle on some of that kind of stuff. So ironically, there's a downside to empathy, and that's something that's called kind of the empathy trap, if you will. And so in 2010, I took off on a 6-month-long road trip with my dog, Wesley. And hoping to kind of discover some things. And I also wanted to see the icebergs off the coast of Newfoundland, and that was a goal. So we went from Portland, Oregon, and meandered our way to the east and stuff, 25,000 miles or so over 6 months. But it was a couple of months in that I arrived my father's living room. This is the dining room table at my father's house. And one of the things that we tend to do whenever I visit is that we tend to kind of gather around that table, and we're either playing board games like Yahtzee or Monopoly, or watching Jeopardy on the television there in the living room, having dinner, of course. But it was 2 months into my trip, and I had just arrived this table. And it's funny where you find inspiration sometimes. It comes up in some rather unexpected places, like upstate New York in a sleepy house and a table. So it was January 25th, 2011, and the news was on, and I'm going to share a little bit of that news.
During the recent violent uprising in Tunisia, we reported some high anxiety in the Arab world that these kinds of protests by the people against their leaders could spread. Well, today they did.
Behind me here, the riot police are getting into position. All day the crowds have got bigger, and just being here is a tremendous act of bravery because the government have promised to crack down on these protests.
Young and old, Christians and Muslims, students and professionals all came together for protests inspired by Tunisia's recent popular revolt. The demonstrators want to seize on the momentum for change, a moment in history they don't want to let slip by.
Will not be silenced, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're an atheist. You will demand your goddamn rights, and we will have our rights, one way or the other. We will never be silent.
We've seen Muslims and Christians, farmers and students, office workers, factory workers, men and women, all sorts of people joining in this demonstration, which has got to be the biggest one many of us have ever seen in Egypt.
People are demanding an end to corruption, to abuse, unemployment, but above all, they want to see the end of President Hosni Mubarak.
Go away, you're Egypt. Go away, Egypt.
So the Arab Spring and the revolution that started on January 25th in Egypt, this uprising of the young people in Egypt was tremendously inspiring to me, to see the passion and the courage that these kids had, and the peaceful sort of solidarity that they seemed to motivate them as well. And so I was really inspired, and I was moved to go there myself and to meet some of these people and to understand what was going on there for myself. So the day that Mubarak was forced from power, I booked a plane ticket on the only airplane that I could find that was going into Egypt at that time. And so I left my truck and my dog with my dad, and I departed for Egypt. I took 2 Leica rangefinder film cameras with me. I took 60 rolls of black and white Tri-X film, and I took a couple of pairs of socks with me as well, just a little bag. And so this is on my first morning there, just walking down this street, and it was very clear to me that I was no longer watching this on television. I could hear the drum beats and the chants and the people coming from Tahrir Square that was just down the street. And so anyway, it was just a few weeks after the revolution actually began, and I was there, and I was making photographs of what would be just sort of typical kind of civilian life and my experience with it at this really precarious kind of historic moment in time. And so just a few pictures from my time there. One thing that I do when I travel is I like to find a pub that is playing a football match by my team, Manchester United. So something I always do when I travel is to try to find a place to watch a Manchester United game. And this has a lot of benefits to it. One is it forces me to engage and meet other people and stuff. And so I found this cafe on my first night there, and watching this game with other men, none of which spoke English, but that was okay. It was very obvious to me, even though I would understand it better later, that there was a complete power vacuum at that point. With Mubarak had stepping down, there was nobody really in charge. So you had 2 main factions. You had the police that were kind of dressed in black, and you had the military that was sort of dressed in green. The military was kind of absent at that moment in time. They were just kind of checked out and fairly neutral. The people in black were kind of some bad dudes. There's a lot of corruption and reports of rape and murder and other things that were going on in this sort of vacuum. So there was a lot of serious sort of downsides to this power vacuum that existed at that moment, but there was also a couple of little upsides, especially in a selfish sort of way, which is, one is that the embassies had all closed and the tourists had vanished. And so at what point in history has there been no tourists in Cairo at the pyramids? I mean, think about it. I don't know, but maybe never. And so I went there. And there was nobody there, and there was nobody really that really cared what I was doing or walking around with. And I had a guy with me who was kind of a translator and a taxi driver and stuff, and so he kind of knew his way around. But anyway, we wandered around, and we went anywhere we basically wanted to go. Quick little story that I'll tell you because it resulted in some of these pictures, and then I'll flip through a few of these and just let you see them. But I had found a hostel to stay in, a fairly modest kind of little hotel. And it was in this decrepit sort of elevator, after being there only a couple of days, that I met, one of those old elevators where, there is no personal space. You're just there next to people. There was an Italian woman and an Egyptian man. And the Egyptian man he was like one of these kind of guys who seems like he knows something. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on. Or he wants you to think that he knows stuff. But anyway, they were talking about, as we were going up just a few flights, they were talking about some big demonstrations that were going to be happening in the square the next day. And I kind of learned, we had a little bit of back and forth and a bit of exchange. They saw my camera bag, and I learned that their photographer had gotten, they were journalists. They run an Egyptian website. The Italian woman was a journalist. And their photographer had been sick. And so I said, well, hey, I'll give you all my pictures if you let me come along. And so that's what I did. And so just after a couple of days there, I had a job to do. And I just accompanied these people as we went into the square. We documented what was happening with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in the square at that time. And at that moment, it was a fairly jubilant sort of atmosphere, but it was also really intense. So there was probably pockets of sort of violence and stuff, but that wasn't my overall kind of experience that I was having. But it was very intense, and a lot of people. And they were interviewing people about the prospect of upcoming sort of presidential elections. And so they were talking to a lot of the different young people, and I simply made some photographs of what they were doing. And I kind of wandered around. saw what was happening. I had a young kind of Egyptian kid that was with me, and he kind of had he was watching my back. So I had the freedom to kind of go places and do stuff, and somebody was kind of shadowing me, which was really helpful. You know, some people really loved the pictures. They loved seeing somebody that, I'm sure there was other journalists there, professional journalists, unlike myself. But there was not a lot of just Western sort of tourists or folks that looked like me. So I stuck out, and I definitely felt eyes on me. And there was suspicion, but then there was also people that were thrilled to see me, because all the tourists had gone. And so you had people out of work, and they didn't have, and stuff. And so they were proud of their country, and they wanted to put on a good show and a brave face for everybody. That one night, we went to try to interview a potential presidential candidate. And so, long story short, this is a brief little conference that we're having in the lobby of a decrepit old government building. And we went to a series of these throughout the night. And I didn't speak the language, of course, and so I didn't really know what was going on. And it felt a little unsafe, because you didn't know who we were going to meet. All I knew is that these were government-type people and politicians and such. And so we were expressing our concerns to Sammy, the leader of our little outfit, who's the hand. And we're just talking about that in this room. We go into the upstairs and down sort of this labyrinth of sort of dusty old wood sort of offices and stuff, and we see men that have mysterious jobs that, you know, I didn't really know, but it was a lot like The Godfather, you would imagine to be. And we arrived at sort of this main office to a minister of law, and this was his deputy. And so we sat here in his office for a little while. When I first walked into this room, I noticed a handgun on the desk, and I noticed these rosary beads that he had in his fingers, and he was kind of playing with them. They're not in this picture, but they're in another one. And a lot of photographs and portraits and paintings and stuff of other heads in state and stuff. And so it was all very interesting. And my little cup of tea sitting on a chair there underneath the security camera, which is interesting little details. So anyway, we didn't actually meet sort of this guy named Amramosa, a potential presidential candidate that night. But I did have an adventure and a couple more pictures, things that were kind of shocking to see, you know, zipping down the highway at, you know, 50, 60 miles an hour, and a family just perched on the back of a moped. So anyway, I was dying to kind of go back. I loved the people. They were really warm and wonderful kind of people. And over the years, I'd been looking for an opportunity to go back to the Middle East, Egypt, or the region, and do some more work like that. I made I had a chance sort of connection with a communications manager for an NGO called MedAir. They do relief work where there's suffering and other kind of emergencies and stuff happening in the world. And I made contact with this woman, and I learned through talking to her that MedAir had a challenge, a communications challenge. You know, they provide some healthcare services and other things that are not very sexy. You know, there's not, you know, when the media attention goes away from a big conflict or emergency, you know, it's hard for them to get support for their mission if you don't have good pictures and a good way to communicate the importance of the work that you're doing. And some of this primary healthcare work and disease prevention and other stuff was vitally important, but it was not effectively communicated. And so I thought I could help with that, given my design and communications background, and given, you know, photography and stuff. I offered to help do this, and they agreed, and they had me to Iraq this past summer. I went for a few weeks, and I spent most of that time embedded with the MedAir teams in a variety of cities and bases throughout northern Iraq. I do want to play a little video. I want to introduce you to one gal. In the last few days of my stay there, I had interviewed a dozen or more people that were staying, you know, displaced Iraqis that were living in a camp. And they were living there, you know, and just waiting. And Nada was one of them. And I'm going to play this kind of video here, but what you won't see in this video is that there was some kids behind my camera that were, you know, giggling and kind of distracting to Nada, and there was a couple of mothers as well that were kind of concerned and perhaps a little sad at some of the interview that was going on. And so you don't really see that. And so I attempted to kind of break the ice with Nada during my short little interview by asking her a question that maybe in hindsight was a little naive. So I'll play that.
اسمي ندى بصف السادس عمري 12 سنة قريتنا الشملان.
Her name is Nada. She's from Shamlan, Al Hawija, and she's 12 years old.
Do you have brothers and sisters? And if so, how many?
عندي 7 خوات ولدي 2 وعندي بيتنا الكبير.
She said, I have 7 sisters, 2 brothers, and we have like an extra large house back there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. You need it.
Pretend nobody is here. It's just you. Pretend it's just you and me. Do you have a favorite brother or sister?
من بين خواتك ال7 هذول يا واحدة من هذول تحبيهم أكثر شيء تحبين أكثر شيء وليش يعني؟ ليش تحبيها حيل؟
توفت حد لأن تظل تفانسني.
She said, I was deep in love with my sister that she had died, that they had killed, because she was the one who usually spent time with me.
What is a very nice memory you have with your sister?
كنت أصخر لها وحلتها.
So I usually task her with my own tasks, like home chores and everything. She's done everything in my place, and she would never complain.
So, like I said, I had talked to about a dozen different people on that particular day, and as you can probably imagine, I was dealing with gear and my camera and making pictures and observations of people and stuff. And during my time there, I heard a lot of really tragic stories, a lot of really graphic details. All the time, everybody had a story to tell, and without fail, they were all bad. It was interesting, though, because within all of those bad stories, there was also little amazing things that would happen. But anyway, it wasn't really until that little moment, that exchange with Nada, maybe because of who she was and how she carried herself and the conversation I was having with her, that little exchange with that girl really affected me. And I became very present in that. And so that was a kind of special moment. These are some of the folks that I kind of talked to. And so I'm going to show you a few pictures, but I'm going to race through them a bit here. But I did a couple of things. I had a lot of questions about what I wanted to learn about. The net of what I knew about Iraq before going is that it seemed like a really bloody and scary place to me. It also seemed like it was very hot. But I also assumed that I was wrong about some of that. And so I thought I would go learn about that firsthand and document some of my experience. There was a few questions and kind of themes that emerged through my work, a focus on culture, a focus on family, a focus on help through MEDAIR and other folks, and then lastly about hope, which is sort of the resilience of people to recover from ISIS and this horror that everybody was going through. All of the guns and stuff, it was interesting to me that I would, I hate guns. And so, but being there, I felt safer around guns than I would here. And so it was interesting, just sort of this change that kind of happened with folks. This was just at a normal market in Erbil. The landscape was brown and gray and concrete, and it looked like time had stopped in some of these, the cities that I went to, unfinished concrete buildings. And it all goes back to kind of 2014 when ISIS kind of swept through and kind of took over and was killing everybody. Life just stopped for these folks. And so you definitely saw that. You saw kids that seemed really happy and engaged and stuff, and I just always wondered, did they actually, how aware were they of what was really going on, and how did that affect them? Thinking about culture and what kind of aspects of Iraqi culture survives sort of tragedy like this. And so seeing how people kind of engage with one another. Seeing families that have a really unique dynamic that I'm not really used to. Seeing girls that are very much a part of protecting the family and their communities. So I spent some time talking to this family and their home. and other. I'd go into some of the. None of these folks had sort of their own homes. They were either in abandoned barns or encampments or other things. A family with a sick kind of son. A family here that we're talking about and trying to share with us some memories, that the only thing they could take from home when they escaped sort of the violence that was coming at them was some photographs. And so we spent some time flipping through some of their old photographs of their family and their memories and stuff. And I learned about this family, a fellow, Khalid, who actually works for MedAir, but he was instrumental in getting his family of 25 people loaded into that small Toyota Hilux pickup truck in the town of Sinjar. And they escaped ISIS over the course of hours through the desert and over the mountains and stuff in that car. And it was amazing to me how they did that, and hearing their stories, and then hearing about the tragedy that befell Sinjar with so many people being killed at Sinjar there. The help that was going on, this was a remote clinic. I took this photograph from above, of course, of people lining up to see the doctor. The doctor's in town, and MedAir's there to kind of help, and kind of seeing that sort of transpire, how they organized those kinds of efforts. Again, how people shared stories. The cell phone is really important to everybody. It's how they communicate with everybody and stay safe and capture memories and stuff. How they're treating sort of benign little injuries that sometimes can be turned into much bigger ones. I look, as a photographer and a designer, I look at a photograph like this and it seems quite, lovely. Just the textures and the colors and stuff that are in a picture like this. But and I didn't really realize that in that particular moment when I was taking this photo, what was actually going on here. And all of those sheets that are covering people's patios with little holes in them was to prevent snipers, ISIS snipers, from killing them in their own homes. And so you had these long alleyways of homes with different sheets of different colors and stuff draped over them, and it was quite interesting. And then looking for signs of hope. Now, I tend to be a rather optimistic guy, and so it's a little easier for me. It's like a Rorschach test, it is what you kind of make it. And but I looked for some of these different things. How do people kind of recover and maintain a sort of a will to kind of live, let alone sort of rebuild their lives. And so going through the town of Sinjar, I sort of, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this young gal with a blue hat with a flower on her hat, and it struck me as sort of an interesting sort of juxtaposition of messages there. The fresh water that arrived that MedAir brought in, and kids playing in it. And the big smiles, and the young and the old, and the pink dresses and stuff were really hopeful signs to me. The young boys who really had it tough because they were either suspected of being ISIS members or they were ISIS members. And neither one of those two scenarios are good if you're in your early 20s or late teens and you're a boy. And ISIS had strict rules about all of the men. They had to grow their facial hair. They couldn't cut their hair at all. And so the first act of rebellion when they were able to escape was to cut their hair off. And so everybody had the same kind of haircut. And so that was quite fun. They were still very much involved in football. They knew they knew what was going on with Real Madrid and Cristiano Ronaldo. And they all seemed to have a soccer jersey on. So the great smiles from kids who have almost nothing was quite striking to me. And sort of this universal sign of hope that seemed to be everywhere. Wrapping up, a couple little things that I wanted to share that comes back to kind of the work that I was able to do. So one is, this may not have had a very significant impact on this family, but I took some photos of this family in their home, and one of these boys is wearing a shirt of a Portuguese football team, Sporting FC in Lisbon. And I published these photos after my trip online, and Sporting FC actually saw this photograph, and they contacted me, and they wondered, well, geez, you got these Iraqi boys who are in a tough place, and yet they have a Sporting shirt on. And so they wondered, why is that? So they reached out to me, and we put together this article for a Portuguese kind of paper about this young boy and their family, and how this shirt came to be on his back. And so again, I don't know if it had any significant effect on the family, but it did have an effect on me. It's just seeing the cause and effect of a genuine or authentic ambition of mine and an interest I had in the work that I do, and to see that it actually could turn into something was kind of quite cool. It seems obvious, but to me it was quite cool. So some press of a different kind is I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, 2,660 miles over the course of 5 months. It goes through the mountains of California, Oregon, and Washington. And in doing that, I made a video, and it kind of went viral, and there was some press and stuff throughout the world that was kind of telling my story in a variety of different ways. And so this was sort of a very unexpected experience that I did not expect to have. To me, it was a selfish adventure, you know. But to realize that it could really impact other people and inspire them was quite special. So over the last couple of years since I released that video, you know, I've received hundreds of messages from people all over the world, much like this one. You know, they looked at this video that I made that was a series of selfies, you know, taking a picture of myself on the trail over the course of this journey. And I think people really connected with that because they could look at my face and they could see what they wanted to see, or try to imagine what I was feeling in terms of fears and other things that were going on. You know, I was poorly prepared and overweight when I first started, and I assumed it would be a transformative experience, and so I wanted to capture it in some way. And the simplest way I could think of at that time, because I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, was simply to take a photo of myself. And so that's what I did. But I did it every single mile, at and as close to every single mile as possible. Because, of course, it has to have integrity and it has to be perfect, right? So anyway, the trip wasn't really about escaping reality or communing with nature. It was just to kind of find a new level of confidence, you know, test my limitations, you know, do something that was really unambiguous. You either get from point A to point B, you hike every single mile along the way, or you don't. It's very clear. So that's kind of what I did. And for somebody that kind of makes a living finding solutions to problems and, you know, circumventing obstacles and stuff, to me it was quite important to have this such an unambiguous kind of challenge in front of me, and it really forced me to find a way to persevere and just I had to keep going. There was no shortcuts. And so anyway, these pictures really helped me because it kept me honest. You know, if I were to quit or take a shortcut, I'd be missing a photo. And with the amount of work that went into just capturing these things, I didn't want that to happen. So I stayed the course. It's a few other photographs and stuff. I learned a lot of different things. It was a much bigger mental challenge than it was a physical one. I had a lot of fears and anxiety going in, whether it was fear of darkness or a fear of heights, a fear of running out of drinking water, or a fear of the rain and having too much water. All of these things sort of preyed upon my mind every single day. A fear of wildlife and bears and stuff, which also quickly went away because you realize they really want nothing to do with you. You know, you don't taste very good. So to me, it was really interesting. But the public commitment to do the hike was the scariest thing of all. And but one of the best lessons that I learned is that nobody can hike 2,660 miles. But I could walk 100 miles 26 times. And so that's what I did. And as sort of my last little bit, I wonder if people would like to see that short little video I put together. Okay.
Met up with an old friend last night, had a cup of coffee. We talked about all the things that have been going on. We talked about the old days, we talked about the new days. We talked just about anything but what was really going on. He said, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know where I've been. And it's one long road that I travel to see you again. He said, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know where I've been. And it seems I got
This is going south to north. So starting at the Mexico border, about 2 hours east of San Diego, and mostly in mountains. The highest point was about 13,200 feet, if I remember correctly. And this is in the high Sierras of California.
Suddenly tears welled up as he did surrender. He cried, I finally lost the...
I got a lot of feedback about the beard, and I didn't end up keeping it because it just annoyed the hell out of me. And so it was itchy, and it aged me much sooner than I wanted to do. So if I had the opportunity, I would shave it off.
And there's one long road that I travel to see you again. No, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know where I'll be. And it seems I got a little trouble and I need to talk to you again.
By the way, this is all still California. It is. It was such a big sort of thing just to get out of California. So I remember crossing into the Oregon border was really quite thrilling because it felt like you actually achieved something. On average, I was hiking between 20 and 30 miles a day, sometimes a little more. Sometimes I'd have an off day in a small mountain town if there was one. And I did the hike alone, but I met a lot of people along the way, other hikers or people that lived in some of the neighboring towns. And you can see over the course of 5 months, the weather changes. As you're moving further north, you're getting closer to fall and more rain and eventually snow. So who would have thought that the road from Portland, Oregon would go to Cairo, Egypt in the middle of a revolution? And who would have thought that the Pacific Crest Trail would actually lead me to Iraq? Because it was because of the success of this video that I made contact with that woman in communications in midair. And so a lot of things kind of happened that were unexpected. And who would have thought that that would all lead me here, talking to you guys. And maybe the last thing I will kind of say and kind of wrap up is simply to say that, like I said at the beginning, is I propose that sort of empathetic kind of design thinking can solve pretty much any problem that ails us. And whether you're trying to connect a brand and its customer, or you're trying to connect with your client, or we're trying to connect a Republican and a Democrat, or we're trying to connect the folks in this room with the people that are outside of this room. I believe that we can do that in much the same way. And so with that, I'll just kind of end and say thank you very much for having me here.